Why is God better than we think?
Is that the name of the show?
Yes.
We back.
Well, welcome to God is Better Than You Think. Hope you're doing well today. My name is Joshua Pease. And once a week, I interview someone within the broad world of Christianity that has a message that often has been underrepresented or doesn't fit into a clean category. The hope in all of this is that whether you're someone who would currently consider yourself a follower of Jesus or someone who is burned by religion or the church or who's just curious about learning more about it, that you would find after listening to this that God is a little bit bigger and more inclusive maybe than you thought he was. So hope you're doing well today. Really quickly, if you are enjoying this, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to this channel. If you are one of our growing podcast listeners, rate, review, subscribe, please do that. All that stuff helps us get this out to more and more people. We'll also have a link in case you are interested in tossing out a few dollars to help keep this thing going and keep it ad free. That's always appreciated as well for those of you who have found this to be useful in your life. So this week's guest is Alan Noble. Alan is a professor at Oklahoma Baptist University. He is the author of the book Disruptive Witness. He currently has another book on the way that we'll be talking about some today. And Alan first caught my attention actually with a talk that I saw that he had given about depression and just mental health in general. And our conversation starts there, his own journey with that and learning to have words for it within Christianity. But then we quickly get into some bigger stuff. We get into talks about society and how it's not built for humans and the role of technology and being bad for our mental health. And basically, how do we exist as functioning, healthy followers of Jesus in such a distracted and fractured world? It's really, really good. I probably laughed more with Alan than I have anyone else, even though the topics that we're covering are really heavy. I hope you enjoy our talk. Let's dive in.
Did I?
Yeah, we are very close. I feel like that would be for etiquette.
Yep.
Anyway, so the great Alan Noble, as he's called on Twitter, wearing the exact hat I expected you to be wearing when I talked to you today.
The green one?
I mean, I don't know. A hat of that style was definitely what I assumed you would be wearing.
Yeah.
Is that an everyday hat for you? Like, how does that work?
I have three.
Okay.
I have a blue, light gray, and the green. So today's the green. It's to go with the tie and the jacket.
It's not based on mood.
Yeah, it's raining here, so that's how I woke up, and that's how I kind of that's my happy place in the morning is I get to coordinate what I'm gonna wear. I tell my students that's like the only place of order in my life where I feel like I have control. Like, okay, everything else in my life seems out of control, but I will match my tie and my hat, and my socks, and my shoes, and I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what I have going for me, and that's not nothing. So
it's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
Yep.
There's several things I'd like to talk to you about, and several things that I appreciate about you. The first and probably most important thing is to say, I just want to thank you on all the work you're doing on behalf of bald people and our representation.
Yeah.
You have been an outspoken advocate well before it was popular, and I just want to say I admire your courage, your bravery.
In my Twitter bio, I need to have one of those things where I said, like, started the bald shaming hashtag, right? So if anyone uses it, I can be like, that's my thing.
That's your legacy, man. Don't let someone take that from you. So for those people who do not know who you are, it's a shrinking number, granted, but for those people who still somehow don't know who you are, tell our listeners / viewers a little bit about the current life of Alan Noble.
So I'm teaching in a pandemic. I'm an associate professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University. So right now I'm teaching a course on Western civilization. So we're doing a little of Augustine, City of God, and the Aeneid, and a bunch of other good
I like how you're pulling the books out to prove that this is real.
It's right. It's real. Yeah, that's right. I have some Chick-fil-A sauce too. That's not part of the course, but so yeah, I'm teaching that. I'm teaching a film noir class, and I'm teaching a composition class. So I've been here. This is my 7th year. I do this. I try to write when I have time, mostly over the summer, books and articles. I helped co-found the website Christ and Pop Culture with Richard Clark, who was at Christianity Today and is now doing other work online. And
I just wrote one.
Yeah, you should.
I just did. I just wrote an article for his new venture he's got going for the Southern Baptist Convention, actually, which
there
is
you go.
not necessarily my lane, but I did it.
Yep, he's awesome.
He's
awesome. What else? That's. I have a wife and 3 kids, and I walk to work, and that's it.
Here's why I
What do you do? What are we doing?
Ostensibly, that's a great question. Ostensibly, what we are doing right now is I just reach out to people within Christianity that I think are interesting, that I think have voices that are underrepresented or talking about topics that I don't think we're talking about enough. I try to create a platform for them. That is really me smuggling in a chance for me to interview and talk with people that I just have found from afar fascinating and want an excuse to make them talk to me. This is the only way I get friends.
It's totally fine.
Yeah. No, so here's actually, I mean, I've been following you on Twitter for a while. I've thought your perspective, yeah, me too. Yeah, I thought your perspective has actually been really profound and great and helpful to me. But here's when I decided, oh my gosh, I need to talk to you for this thing I'm doing here. And I watched a talk that you gave, I believe it was at OBU,
that one.
Chapel.
Yeah.
And it was a talk where you discussed mental health, depression, anxiety in a way that I thought was so grace-giving, that I thought was so helpful. And I want to, at some point in time, lean into that and for us to talk about that for a little while. But to get there, I'd love to hear a little bit, because you shared a little bit of it in your talk. I would love to hear a little bit about your story. Like, how did you get to the point where you're at now, where you're a professor at a university, advocating for these things?
That's a great question. I have no idea. So I was homeschooled in Southern California. My parents went to we went to Assemblies of God Church. It was fairly fundamentalist. So I grew up in my parents were not theologically trained at all. And so they, our theology, our approach of Christianity, to Christianity tended to be heavily shaped by the churches that we were in. So, for example, I couldn't watch Smurfs because there was some kind of demonic dimension to it. You're nodding your head like, yeah.
No, it's evil. I don't know.
It seems like it is kind of weird.
And I don't know. I mean,
so I think it was something about them being blue. It insinuated that they might be dead at the time.
It's just a perversion of the natural order, Alan.
To be perfectly honest, like, I don't know what are the parodies of things that I wasn't allowed to do in the 80s and 90s, and what are the like legit reasons. They blur together. Like I can't, because they're horror stories about Cabbage Patch Dolls. I don't know.
Oh no, we did. My sister had Cabbage Patch Dolls. That was okay, but the Smurfs one was real, and it was like a zeitgeist kind of thing, a Christian subculture. Like, no, we know that's not okay. So Smurfs wasn't okay. The Simpsons wasn't okay. But if you tried to get people to explain why, most of them wouldn't be able to tell you. My guess is James Dobson, ? I don't know. That's where most of my parents got their ideas from.
Yeah, it was in the air. So that was the environment I grew up in. And that's important, I think, for my story, because it's late 80s, early 90s evangelicalism that was primarily hostile or antagonistic towards culture, antagonistic and highly skeptical. There was a lot of suspicion that culture was secretly, insidiously molding us.
Yeah.
So, that's that background. I was introduced to Francis Schaeffer when I was about 13. I read How Then Should We Live? How Should We Then Live? I can't remember the title. I always get those.
Series of those words put together.
Yep, exactly.
Really,
And it blew my mind because here was a man who all these homeschool moms said I should read. And he was talking about pop culture. I mean, it was pop culture of the 60s and 70s, but it was still secular. And he wasn't talking about it in a degrading way. He wasn't saying, watch out, for these evil influences. He wasn't saying, look how these pagans are miserable. He would praise what was praiseworthy, but he would also be discerning and have some, at the time, I believe to be rich analysis. And so that was a new world for me. That sort of changed the entire trajectory of my life because I realized, okay, I can be a faithful Orthodox Christian and have a different posture to the culture around me. So then it was just a matter of, well, what does that look like? And I played music in a band for quite a while at a community college. I started studying English and got a master's in English. And at that point, I was married, and the decision I had to make was between trying to do something in ministry where I would help fellow Christians participate in culture better by counseling and discipleship, and maybe I had this idea that I could mentor, Christians who wanted to start bands, because I just thought, man, when I was a teenager, there was no one in my church I could have talked to about like, how do you be a Christian and make music? They would have been like, well, talk about Jesus. Like, oh, okay, cool, thanks, that's great. So that was one vision, but that's not a career path, really. That's just not really exactly a thing. I just have to find a church that's wealthy enough to afford it. Or I thought I could study English, get a job at a Christian college where pastors are going to go through, and through that I can help train young Christians in how to participate, how to read culture well, biblically, discerningly, and then hopefully there'll be some, like, this is trickle down, this Reaganomics, trickle down effects. As they're going from the pulpit, as they're ministering to their congregations, it will feed through, because I didn't feel like I was getting that from my pastors growing up.
Yeah.
So that was my plan. And so I got into Baylor, and right about that time too is when I started writing for Christ in Pop Culture. So there was just this overwhelming feeling like this is it. I'm passionate about helping Christians think about culture, whether that's in the political sphere or the arts or technology or whatever. It's fascinating to me, and I'm concerned about my people. That's what I'm concerned about, my people, and I feel like there's a lot of confusion. So went to Baylor, got a PhD, got this job, and just kept writing online, and here I am.
So one of the things that stood out to me as I was watching the talk that I mentioned earlier is you referenced, and correct me if I'm getting the details wrong here, but
I will.
Thank you. Thank you. It seems to me like somewhere along the line, that mental health piece of that was playing into your life, although maybe there weren't like words or language or a paradigm for you to understand that.
Yeah, sure. So you're only ever in your own head, and so it's really difficult to know to what extent your experience is a common experience or not. I know, for example, I distinctly have this memory of being about 12 or 13 and riding my bike outside my house and being overwhelmed with different feelings. And I remember thinking to myself, prior to this, I had like 5 feelings I could have, and this is like, I don't know, this is a mixture of like 20 different feelings I've never experienced before. Now, part of that was puberty, but what I distinctly remember at the time was it wasn't sexual. It was actually like depression or despair or something. It was a kind of sadness that I had never felt before, and it was weird. I'm just sitting on my bike by myself in the middle of the street thinking, I have never felt this sadness before. Where did this come from? What just happened to me? And I have no answer for that. But I, I don't want to talk too much about my family, but I'll just say that I grew up around not my immediate family. My immediate family's very stable, but my extended family, parts of my extended family, who we were close to and lived nearby, very nearby, um, lived very sad lives, very destructive lives. So there was a lot of alcoholism, a lot of physical and sexual abuse, a lot of mental abuse, a lot of drug addictions, um, uh, jail time, um, abandonment, cycles, particularly cycles of abuse, lots of cycles of abuse, and just seeing that happen from generation to generation. So that was something that I had witnessed, and um, I knew that this wasn't everyone's experience. That other people did not, have relatives that had this much trauma and drama and problems. But I think what really hit me was when I had to move from Palmdale, California, to Waco, Texas, to go to Baylor. I had never left my hometown before. The hometown where I grew up in is made up of two large cities, Palmdale and Lancaster. They're right next to each other. Paul George, do you watch basketball?
I do.
Okay, so Paul George has spent time in Palmdale. He went to one of these Palmdale high schools. So that's where I was, in this desert community, and I had never left that community. And here I was married, and I was going off to grad school, and I was terrified. I couldn't articulate the anxiety I had, and so it manifested in some other ways. But I was absolutely existentially terrified of what I was doing, because I was leaving my home, I was leaving my friends, I was going to a big school to start a graduate program, and I felt like a complete phony.
Yeah.
And that anxiety didn't go away once I got there. I wasn't like I showed up and was like, oh, actually everything's going to be okay. It only festered and grew more,
Yeah.
more, and more. And it took a lot of time. It took hitting a very low point in my marriage, basically, for my wife to say, like, okay, you need to get some help. You need to go get some help, because this isn't going to work. And that's exactly what I needed. That's exactly what I needed. So during that time at Baylor, while I was going through some profound emotional anguish and challenges, and I was also getting to spend more time with older adults. So prior to that, my community of friends tended to be people my age, but we started going to this new church, and the couples that we were in our small group with were slightly older than us by about 5 or 10 years, depending. And slowly over time, people in this group would sort of acknowledge things that were going on in their lives. And what happened to me was I realized, wow, actually, most of us are screwed up
Yeah.
in some way, or screwed up, or we're dealing with some baggage that you would never think of. You had no idea. And this still is the case. I still, to this day, regularly, someone will bring me into their confidence about something going on in their life, and I will discover a new human depravity, some new tragedy, some way somebody had to suffer, didn't have to, but they did suffer, that I didn't even know was possible or common. And um, so a couple of things happened out of that experience. By the time I left Baylor, I was aware of my own weaknesses and my own need for grace. I was also aware that most of the people around me were carrying some baggage, that some burden that they probably did not articulate to anyone else, or to many people at all. and were ashamed to. And I was also very aware, because I had been teaching that entire time, of how my undergraduate students would very often be suffering from some of that same imposter syndrome that I came into grad school with. Also, during that time, just historically, there has been, so this was 2008, 2007, 2008. There started to be a significant rise in mental health diagnoses for college students. And in fact, I remember at Baylor, they used to have a very functional mental health, counseling services, but then it just got overloaded. Just within a couple of years, it was just packed, and they had to scramble to figure out what to do. And I remember talking to the head of their program, and he was like, everyone is talking about this. Every college, every counseling director at every college is trying to figure out what to do, because the numbers just keep going up and nobody knows why. So that was a lot. That was a lot together, right? And when I came here, the best part, the most meaningful part of my job is getting to mentor and disciple students, and sometimes that means that that they need to talk about some difficult things, and so my experience here only reinforced those trends and reminded me and made me aware how important it was for students to hear certain things, so that they don't feel alone, so they're not confused. Things that, frankly, I wish somebody had told me while I was in college.
I'm curious. So, as we I'll transition here a little bit into some of the work that you've been doing. The book that you wrote, one you have coming up. But as you're talking, I feel like there's a little bit of an intersection between what we're talking about and some of the things that you have been writing about, of just how distracted we get even from our own souls. Like, we're not really fully aware of what's going on inside of us. How do you see there being an intersection between mental health and all these things that we're talking about and kind of this distracted world that we live in?
Yeah, sometimes I think like I've only got one thing to say. I don't know if I could write it in a sentence, but I feel like I've really just got one thing to say. And when I'll listen to a talk that I've given, or I'll read a paper or a book or something, I'll be like, but I talked about this in an entirely different context over here. And this is a perfect example of it. In Disruptive Witness, as you rightly pointed out, the focus I have in there, I mean, I do talk about despair to some extent. I don't remember if I use that word, but I talk about the modern fear of self, the modern fear of being alone with yourself and having to deal with your existence, the fact that you're alive, and what do you do with that? How do you justify your being in the world? And I think that is a particular burden for modern people that prior to the secular age, I don't think people had quite that same burden. They might have the burden of trying to impress their father, or a spouse or something like this. But this existential justification, the question, is my life valid? Is it significant? Is it worthy? I don't think that quite troubled the medieval and ancient mind as it does us, and I think it is absolutely pervasive in our own time. So, there's this great line in The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot where he talks about people who are distracted by distraction, or distraction. What is it? Distracted by distraction with distraction, or something like that. And that's sort of where we are as modern people. Is that one way we keep the anxiety of life, of existence at bay, is that we plug in. And sometimes we do it with very virtuous things. I mean, right now there are a lot of very serious political things going on, social unrest, things that, as a good citizen, as someone who loves his neighbor, you should probably be aware of. And so it's very easy to say, well, I can't deal with this because I've got to plug into this, and I'm getting out of myself, and I'm loving my neighbor by paying attention to these things. And that can be true, and at the same time, it can also be a way of distracting yourself, a way of distracting yourself and feeling virtuous about yourself at the same time. So, yeah.
How dare
So, yeah, I
I'm
know.
feeling
I know.
personally attacked right now,
I'm
and
not,
I don't care for
me
it.
too. Me too. Let me say this. Let me say this. You asked about how these things are all related, and you
Yeah.
mentioned being personally attacked. I feel like my writing personally attacks me. For real. For real. I seriously think
Well,
that,
cut it out then.
I know. Sometimes preachers talk about like they're writing to themselves, like they're preaching to themselves. I I don't say this very much, but I really do feel like a lot of the stuff that I write, I'm it's like self therapy or something. Like, hey, Alan, stop being distracted.
Don't you think that most of us, to some, it may even get a few degrees removed, but most of us that are out there, we're just we're taking something that we struggle with or that happened to us or whatever, and we're trying to reframe it in a way that we think will help other people. I mean, that's what I'm doing.
Right.
I mean, I'm like reframing my evangelical upbringing and trying to be like, no, there's a lot of really great things from that, but also let's bring some hope to people who have been just sledgehammered into the ground by it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So your book,
Yeah.
Disruptive Witness.
Yeah.
Explain a little bit to people who aren't familiar with it, what that book's about, and then I'm going to kind of bring us back around to what we've been talking about.
Yeah. So in the book, I make the argument that there are two large cultural/social forces that make bearing witness to the Christian faith particularly uniquely difficult in our own time. And those two forces are secularism and technology of distraction. And for secularism, I work with the Canadian Catholic philosopher Charles Taylor. And with technology of distraction, I just sort of do a sort of cultural analysis of our technology of distraction, which we've all are too familiar with, unfortunately. And sort of the conclusion that I come to is that both of these forces work in tandem to create a kind of buffer around us so that we don't have to experience the transcendence, and we don't even have to look at ourselves. So it's kind of like a force field protecting us from life's big questions, from the miraculous, from the beautiful, from the truly evil also. And that's sort of the first half of the book, describing how this happened, some history, some cultural analysis, and then the second half is, well, what do we do about this? How can we, if we desire to bear witness to the Christian faith effectively, meaningfully, in a world where people are walking around buffered, and they assume that when you talk about Christian faith, you're just talking about a lifestyle option. We need a new vocabulary. We need a way of disrupting their conception of God, of faith, because they're going to have a very modernist conception. It's one that medieval and ancient people would not have shared, or very likely would not have shared. And so the second half of the book tries to help us think through what does that look like? And I talk about the church and communion, the Lord's Supper, prayer, how that does it, how works of arts and literature can help stir us up and awaken us and disrupt our thinking. How personal practices and habits can do the same thing in our own lives privately. And that's the book.
So when you talk about this concept of that a lot of people aren't even going to understand what it means to follow Jesus, that there's this very modernist take on it, or that I believe you said it's not a lifestyle. It's not like a lifestyle choice. What do you mean by that? What is it then? Like unpack for people, like what would you perceive the gospel of Jesus as being?
So I think our default way of conceiving of any faith is as a sort of buffet option. So, and sometimes people will talk about their spiritual journey in precisely these terms. They will say, I was raised Christian, but I realized I hadn't sampled all these other religions. So I had to go out and sample Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and Judaism and Native American. What?
So that one gave me food poisoning, so I didn't
Right.
like it. But
Right,
yeah.
exactly. So you try out all these things, and it is very much like a buffet. And in the same sense that what a buffet says to you is that all these choices are available for you to choose, but you are at the center of the experience, and ultimately what fulfills you is what you choose to be fulfilled by. So that's one paradigm. And I think because we live in a consumer society, that is the way we think about most things. I think that's how we think about buying cars. How we think about listening to music, right? We try different styles and genres and artists until we find what pleases us. It's often how people think about relationships. It's how people think of careers. So if you're in a modern mindset where the concept of choice is at the center of your daily experience everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
then certainly when somebody presents the gospel to you, you're going to, no matter what language, maybe not no matter what, but very likely whatever language they use, you will hear that as them telling you that they have found something that works nicely for their life.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. That's the wrong thing. So you ask the question, so what's the alternative?
Mm-hmm.
And so the alternative is that Christianity isn't an option. And by that I don't mean that I'm going to be forcing people into
A totalitarian Christian state.
right. Yeah, I'm not the threat of death to become Christian, but rather
Good
that
news. We have a political reality right now that might be okay with some of that. So
sad times.
yeah.
But instead, what I'm saying is that when we're talking about the Christian faith, we're actually peeling back reality itself.
Right.
We're revealing something, truths about being itself, existence itself. We're not adding a layer of meaning or interpretation or symbols or values. We're peeling back. We're doing a work of revealing. And what that means is that there may be things in the Christian faith that make me uncomfortable. And
Mm-hmm.
if the Christian faith were a lifestyle, then I would bounce. I would say, okay, this isn't this makes me uncomfortable. Why would I stay with this? Why
Mm.
would I stay with this? But because it's the revealing of reality,
Mm.
then I have to reorient myself.
Mm.
And that's very difficult for modern people to conceive of and to pursue. But
It
that's
is. And yet at the same time, if we unite the streams here, we've also been talking about, and I think most of the people who are watching or listening to this can identify with this, that the overwhelming reality for most people, especially during a pandemic, especially when the economy is tanking, especially when our political reality is just a freaking nightmare of like, never, not even going to go down that rabbit hole right now. It's not, it's not like our current condition is doing okay though. I mean, it's like there is a, I mean, this is kind of the thing, right? Is
yeah.
like we don't want to deal with the pain of the following Jesus because it gets too difficult. But the reality is we're living in pain and difficulty right now.
Already. Yeah.
Right. And that's but that's the illusion. I think and this is where I think your book was just so prophetic and timely in that. But the way that I deal with that, I won't even say we, the way I deal with that is the moment I feel uncomfortable, I'm bouncing on to social media. I'm going to that website that I always look at. Distract, because I don't want to feel to the point where silence itself starts making me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, and my second book, it's certainly came out of the conversations I had about the first book, but is very different in its focus. One of the conversations that helped inspire it is people reading the book and coming away feeling like I'm asking them to not ever be distracted, that I'm asking them to live a kind of pure life.
Right.
And
Some sort of existence.
And what you said was really important, that we're already suffering. Like
Right.
that the society that we live in is already incredibly screwed up. And so that's really the kernel of that sparked this next book, which doesn't really have a title yet, but wherein I'm going to make the argument that that contemporary Western society is not built for humans as God designed us. And because it is not built for humans as God designed us, we are constantly in friction. And so I use in the book, if it doesn't get edited out, I use the analogy of zoo animals, right? So if you've ever been to a zoo and you've seen a lion or a bear pacing in circles compulsively, sometimes they'll have these paths, right? And there's a term for that escapes me right now, but the principle is roughly the same, in that here's this environment that is meant to make them feel at home, but it's not actually made for animals, because animals are meant to be free. And so part of what I do in this book is argue that there's a false anthropology, which is the idea that as humans individually, we are our own and we belong to ourselves. And when you craft a society based around that idea of a human being, then you run into all sorts of problems that create anxiety, depression, violence, turmoil, social strife, all these sorts of things. And one of the practical implications for that is that living in the modern world is highly stressful, that it's a high anxiety existence. And one of the hardest parts of the book to write was the section where I try to talk about showing grace for other people and having grace for ourselves when we really can't tell ourselves not to be distracted. Well, I'll give you an example. You have a difficult day at work and you come home. For me, I've got 3 kids. They're screaming. They're crazy because they're living their own lives, right? And they've got their own things going on.
It's really annoying. Children have their own needs and wants.
That's right.
I find it very inconvenient.
So I put them to bed, and I go downstairs, and now I have a couple hours before I need to go to bed. And if I lived in a more ordered and in a more ordered world, a society maybe built for humans, maybe I could use that time to be very enriching. So I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to, do whatever. But sometimes the reality is that Alan, in that situation, the best thing he can do is watch an episode of Community or The Office or whatever, and that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. There are certainly some forms of distraction. There are some levels of distraction that are sinful. Some things that people distract themselves with are inherently sinful, and some the extent to which they distract themselves can become a form of gluttony or sin in some way. But I think for a lot of us, we have to have grace for ourselves. We have to recognize that sometimes. So, for example, I had to pay in income tax. I haven't had to do that in a long time, and I was not expecting how much it was going to be. And I sent off that check digitally, and I went to my freezer and I took out the tub of ice cream, and I had some ice cream. And a better Alan, a more together Alan would have been like, well, this is fine. God is in control, and it's all right to send thousands of dollars off, but I'm not that Alan.
And I'm not going to think about where that money's going to.
Right. Yeah, for real.
The defense contracts.
Exactly. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind that part of the reason we're turning to these distractions is that we're not in a society that's built for us. And sometimes those distractions are not good, but they're also not sin. And it's important for us to have grace for each other, but also be discerning. So that's the fine line I'm trying to walk. I don't know if I do it in the book or not. My editor will tell me.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Everyone,
Yeah.
everyone, go to the book whenever it comes out and find out if Martin fell flat on his face or not.
That's right.
Okay, so you've said multiple times now that we are living in a society that's not built for humans.
Yep.
Living in a culture and a world that is not designed for humanity. Uh,
Hmm.
I feel like you need to explain that more. That's got to be catching some people's attention right now. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So um, I'm just going to give one example because I think it's a fascinating and evocative example. Um, Social media is not actually designed for humans as we truly are. It's designed with the belief that we are our own and belong to ourselves, and because of that, we need to be expressing ourselves. We need to have the freedom to share whatever we want and do whatever we want.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have the freedom to do that efficiently. And that has led to historically, an interesting problem, which is that people on social media share profoundly disturbing things. Not just bad opinions, not just conspiracy theories, not even just bad words, but rapes, murders, animal brutality, horrific things, terrorist acts, shootings, brutal killings, and so we've introduced this problem, and in order to fix this, in order to address this, what we have to do, what these social media companies have had to do, is they've had to hire people to moderate content. So there's some guy and girl, there's groups of people who will go into some business
Thank you for being egalitarian about these.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. You're welcome. Yeah, I try. And they will sit in a cubicle for 8 hours a day, sifting through some of the most horrific
Yeah,
images and videos that humanity has created. Humans are not built for that.
right.
We're not. We're not made for that. So here we create this system, this structure, this technology where we're allowed to express ourselves endlessly, and as an unintended consequence, somebody has to live an increasingly inhuman life. Now, what happens to many of these workers is PTSD and various traumas. And so what they'll end up doing is they actually turn to drugs or alcohol or illicit sex or to try to cope.
It's sort of if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a snapshot, a metaphor of like what it's doing to all of us, right? It's not just
Yeah.
those people. It's like they're taking the brunt of it. They're taking like the worst, but to some level or another. And I mean, this isn't like a particularly controversial point of view either. I mean, I'm more and more seeing people on Twitter from vastly different
Yeah.
philosophical points of view that are all saying this might be destroying me from the inside out. I might, it's like people I
Right.
really respect are like, I'm done. I've got to, like, I mean, you saw what happened to Damon Lindelof post Lost, where he's like, I just can't do this anymore. He's like, I'm out. And I'm like,
Yeah. I just saw a Twitter thread yesterday where someone went through and found a bunch of examples of young girls on TikTok and various other video apps talking about how when they look back to their like preteen era experience on the internet, they were really being groomed by older men. And it's just horrifying. The thread is good because it's raising awareness of something.
right.
I had no idea,
Probably.
right? But it's like story after story of these girls looking back and saying, "Oh my gosh, the way these men were talking to me when I would go into these chat rooms, they were grooming me. They were." And some of these girls are have this anxiety about photos of them still floating around the dark web, things like that. It's a it's this bizarrely, obscenely inhuman world that we live in. And we don't often think about it in those terms. We often just think, well, look, we've got the internet, we have freedom. What are you going to do? And I think we need to go a little further than that.
Yeah. I recently, just the interview I did that's going up today, wasn't on this topic at all, but the person I was interviewing was talking about his father was this very conservative military man, but who viewed the his military service, he viewed it as he was fighting for the right of other people to be able to express themselves and do whatever. And he saw that military freedom as like, I am doing this on behalf of other people, that they may have all these freedoms and do whatever they want with them. And so when he saw people protesting wars and stuff like that, he's like, in a way, this is what I fought for.
Yeah.
And there's a level of moral response, a sense of a moral collective to that, that kind of stunned me a little bit. Where I'm like, I think we've lost the sense of the common good. We've lost a sense of like that we belong to each other.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the tentative title for the book is that we are not our own. And so the at the core of this book is the first question and answer in the Heidelberg Catechism, which is that what is your only hope in life and what is your only comfort in life and in death? And that's that we are not our own, but belong body and soul and life and death to our faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. So really the second half of the book is a teasing out of that alternate anthropology. So if we are not our own but belong to God, what does that mean for example, questions of identity? Because at the core of the modern person is an identity crisis. That is the prototypical crisis that everyone experiences in the modern world. That wasn't really the case in the ancient or medieval world. We have identity crises. So what does that mean for identity? What does that mean for values, including ethics and morals? So you give an example of that. So this military father, because he believed that he did not belong to himself, but he belonged to others, that meant that he valued risking his life to protect their liberties. What does it mean for what are the other things? Justification, how we justify our lives, how we find meaning in lives, how we belong. There's a major anxiety from contemporary people is a sense of belonging. So what does it have to do with, how does it address all these different things? So I don't know if that was your question. But that's what came to mind.
I probably looked at it with more of just like a society crazy.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Oh no, okay, that's right. Because you were saying, I'm not saying that this is the first time it's happened.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. So I suspect, I'm not a historian, but I suspect that you could go back and you could look at any sort of era and you could ask the question, how did people of this era typically misunderstand what it meant to be human? And how did that misunderstanding affect the structures and systems of society in detrimental ways? But I'm not a historian, so I'm not doing that work. But I also think that there are categorically different things that have happened. So, for example, pornography is not new. You go to the houses in ancient Rome, and there are all kinds of phallic drawings on the wall. So not new at all. But I think we have to say that the contemporary experience of pornography, where it is ubiquitous, where it is almost every human seems to be available for you to consume, that's categorically, like at a certain point, you have to say, this is a different kind of pornography. This something has changed. This is categorically different. Yeah. So that's part of my argument too, is that yes, there's a continuation. Yes, this is, things have always been rough. They've always been bad, but there are specific ways where we can mark out categorical differences.
Something you said is interesting to me, like when you talk about pornography and the ability to consume just about every human that's out there, is that we simultaneously have access to almost every human, and yet they aren't really a human to us. And not just pornography, but social media and all that. It's like we're exposed to all of humanity, but humanity is depersonalized, and so we don't have a sense that we owe them anything, right?
If we are our own and belong to ourselves, then other persons can only be known abstractly, and their personhood is never solid. It's other people can be instrumentalized for our own good. Now that can be maybe I instrumentalize somebody by taking a tweet they did and I quote tweet it and I dunk on them. And so what I'm doing is I'm using them and their expression in order to promote myself. Or maybe I'm finding pornographic images of them and I'm turning them into an instrument for my own personal pleasure. Or maybe I'm conning them or manipulating them into voting for a candidate or getting them to send me money to my Patreon account or whatever it might be. But the key is, if we are our own, then other people have no demands on us. So then I can use them as instruments. And I do think that we see, and technology exacerbates this problem. But I do think that we live in a society that is that where we tend to instrumentalize each other. And in the book, I do talk about pornography as a symbol for the contemporary sickness that we have. I argue that we live in a pornographic society, but not that pornography is the worst thing, but that, I mean, you just give a great example of it. That same kind of way, that same kind of logic that governs pornography, where I can consume people for my own pleasure, governs so much of our interactions, right? And that I find to be incredibly fascinating and disturbing and sad.
Yeah, fascinating in that, oh, holy crap, are we doomed sort of way.
That's right.
Kind of fascinating.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple questions to end on here. The first one is this. If someone's watching this and they're thinking, man, I need more Alan Noble in my life, how might they go about doing that?
I don't know what to
promote yourself.
I advise not, but so I don't even know. Okay. I think I have a website, oalannoble.com. I'm not even sure if that's true.
No, you do.
Okay.
I looked at it before I jumped on here. It's a real thing.
Why are you even asking me? You have the answer.
Okay. I don't know, because I thought you would want to do it. So Alan has a book called Disruptive Witness. It's available for sale anywhere that you can get books. It's fantastic. He has another book he's writing that's untitled as of yet.
Who knows?
But it seems like it's going to be good.
I hope so. I have no idea.
Yeah, don't blow it. Okay, so...
Thanks.
You're welcome. No pressure, but we're all counting on you. And
that's how I feel too.
Keep an eye out for that. If you are on Twitter, you should follow Alan on Twitter. And this has come through in this interview a lot, but I think you've done a very good job on Twitter of you bring a very, I feel like you don't get sucked into the machine as much as I know I do, as a lot of people do, where even the times when I might not entirely agree with you, I think you present such a, you hold to who you are very well on Twitter. And I don't see you getting sucked into the outrage machine as much. I don't see you getting sucked into like a point of view as much. I feel like you are good at advocating a consistent moral, philosophical point of view. That's probably what I've admired most about you on Twitter is last question. I think I'll get you more.
Yeah.
I'm discovering you really don't like talking about yourself. That's what we've learned today. This is a question I ask every single person I have on, regardless of who they are.
I would not know that because I've never seen this. I don't even know if this is a real show.
It's not. This is all made up.
For real?
No, this is not. I am the only person who will ever watch this.
If it didn't have this little red button up here that says live recording, I would be really suspicious.
It's only going live to me. It's not actually like no one else is watching.
You know? That's fun. I knew it. All right, ask your question that you've asked everyone. Go ahead.
I don't like the antagonistic tone this is ending on at all. Oh gosh, what was the question? Okay, yeah, here it is. Is the titular question actually. Why is God better than we think?
Is that the name of the show?
Yes.
First of all, titular makes me very uncomfortable.
It does me too. I didn't like using it, but it's a thing smart people use. I expected you, a man of learnedness and a hat such as yours, would be okay with titular, but...
Stop saying it. Stop saying it. What was the question again? Why is God bigger? Better?
Better
than we think.
Yes.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So I've been thinking about this. I sound like I'm plugging my second book, but really it's just that I spent
to get you to plug your second book.
And I don't even know the name of it. So like, go buy this untitled book. But it's just that I spent the entire summer working feverishly and reading on it. And so one of the things I was reading, was a work by Jacques Ellul called The Meaning of the City. And in it, he does this sociological, theological reading of Jonah. And he talks about, and in context of like having political hope for the city, he points out how the conversion of Nineveh is a miracle. And it's a miracle that kind of pissed off Jonah. And that's been sitting with me quite a bit right now in our political climate. Just there's so much to be despairing about. And I don't, because sometimes people are like, well, what do you think, you're conservative, what do you think the future could be? Like, what would be the ideal, or what do you think could happen? And my answer, I cannot envision it. Like, my imagination is not that good. I don't know. I cannot see a way out of where we are going right now. But I don't have to. Like, I have to be faithful to the obligations God has put before me. And we serve a God who converted an entire city of pagans who were, killing the Israelites. And I don't want to be Jonah. I don't want to be the man who, when the people I view as my enemies repent, I'm mad at God because I wanted them to be judged and punished with hellfire, right? And that's hard. That's
man, that's rough.
Because I feel like internally I have a very strong sense of righteous indignation and justice. That doesn't mean my sense of justice is right. It's just that it gets hype, right? And so, that's a check on my heart, because it reminds me, when we have a vision of what the future needs to look like, this is what this needs. Here's what justice looks like in Nineveh. God, you come down and you wipe these people out. And Jonah must have felt that. And I think he had reason to feel that way. And God's like, no, I'm just going to have them all repent, because that's who I am. And you have no right to say anything about it. And that, to me, is one example of how God is better than we imagine. Because God is this merciful God, a God who redeems all things in ways that, thank God, we can't imagine, because our vision of how to solve things in the future is almost always oppressive or pathetic or self-absorbed or a castle in the sky. And God is in charge and he's sovereign. Thank God. There you go. There's your answer.
No, that's a good answer, and one kind of messed me up a little bit. I love the story. I love the story of Jonah. And I've been sleeping on that part of it a little bit. And how it was written, more than likely written to a group of people in exile at the time, and where it leaves, and it leaves it open of like, should I not care for this great city? Question mark? Just kind of fades off. And as the readers living in captivity in the Babylonian Empire are left with that. Right. And it's the same right now, right? Should I not care for that group of people that you so passionately disagree with, to the point that you think they're like the, okay, well,
yep. And that gets back to, I know you're trying to end this, but that gets back to your point about the common good, right?
No, 100%, yeah.
That's it. Do you believe, and I think that's a critical, maybe the critical political question right now. Do you believe that there is the possibility of the common good? Yes or no? And I think that a lot hinges upon that. Because otherwise, if there's no common good, there's only private good, and all we have left is identity politics. And the right has been very successful at identity politics in very destructive ways, and I think you could say the same for the left. So that's just dropping an idea bomb, boom, and you're trying to end it. But
well, I'm just trying to end it mostly to get you out of here. I could keep talking for a while, but
you have kids.
You do have kids. All right, well, let's be done. I'll tell you what, I'll stop recording here in a second, and then we can keep talking, and people can just guess what sort of frivolity we got up to once I did the recording. But I do want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. Thank you for the voice that you're bringing, and thank you for making time for the one person who's watching this.
It's great. I hope they enjoyed it. I hope they enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed talking.
I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too.
See, there you go. All right, I'm going to stop recording now.
Boom.